Retired Master Sergeant Eleanor Vance sits in her corner booth when a hulking biker snarls, "Move it, Grandma." "This is my table," before a sharp slap echoes through the silent diner, shattering more than just the morning peace. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon was a form of time travel. For Eleanor Vance, Ellie to her friends, it was the smell of every good Tuesday morning for the past 5 years. She sat in her usual corner booth at the North Star Diner, a sanctuary of gleaming chrome and worn-out vinyl that had weathered the decades with stubborn grace. Sunlight, thick with dancing dust motes, streamed through the large plate glass window, illuminating the pages of her book, a detailed manual on cultivating heirloom roses. At 68, Ellie carried herself with an unshakable poise that seemed at odds with the gentle softness of her silver hair, neatly pinned in a practical bun. Her back was as straight as the flagpole outside the town hall, a permanent relic of a 30-year career spent in service. Most people saw a quiet widow, a kind woman who tipped generously and knew the names of all the waitress's children. They didn't see the Master Sergeant. They didn't notice the faint, silvery scar that traced the line of her left temple, a whisper from a chaotic evacuation in a forgotten country. Or the glint in her sharp, blue eyes, the kind of eyes that had once scanned flight manifests and supply chain logistics with a precision that could mean the difference between life and death. The North Star was her place. The walls were a patchwork history of the town, covered in faded black and white photographs of smiling young men in uniform, standing proudly beside biplanes and battleships. It was a place of honor. Ellie's own history was more discreet. The only clue to her past was a simple, understated ring on her right hand, its dark blue stone bearing the insignia of the United States Air Force. She had enlisted in 1973, a determined young woman stepping into a world overwhelmingly dominated by men. She hadn't been a pilot or a frontline warrior, she was a logistician, a master of the intricate dance of supply and demand that kept the Air Force flying. From the tense airbases of Cold War Germany to the dusty, windswept deserts of the Middle East, she had brought order to chaos. She had proven herself not with volume, but with competence, earning the respect of generals and mechanics alike. Her greatest source of pride, however, was not in any medal or commendation. It was in her son, Alex. He had grown up with her stories, not of combat, but of duty, honor, and the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. He'd seen the strength it took for his mother to command respect in a world that wasn't always ready to give it to her. He followed her path of service, graduating from West Point and choosing a career in the Army. Now an officer himself, he was stationed at a regional recruiting command just an hour's drive away. "More coffee, Ellie?" Ellie looked up from her book, a warm smile spreading across her face. Martha, the diner's owner, a bustling woman with a heart as big as her personality, stood by the table with a steaming pot. "You read my mind, Martha." "Thank you." Martha filled the ceramic mug, a cheerful blue piece decorated with a hand-painted rendering of the West Point crest. "A gift from Alex. Still trying to figure out those roses?" Martha asked, gesturing to the book. "They're more stubborn than a second lieutenant," Ellie quipped, her eyes twinkling. Martha's smile faltered for a moment as she glanced nervously toward the front door. "Just hope we have a quiet morning. Been some trouble lately." Ellie followed her gaze. "Oh. That new motorcycle club," Martha lowered her voice. "The scrap hounds, they call themselves. Nothing but trouble. They were in here last week, making a scene. Gave Susan, the new girl, a terrible time. She wrung her hands in her apron. I just don't want any problems, you know." Ellie's expression remained placid, but a familiar sense of watchfulness settled over her. She knew the type. Bullies who mistook noise for strength and fear for respect. She gave Martha a reassuring nod. "This diner is a town landmark, Martha. It'll take more than a few loud pipes to change that." Martha seemed to take comfort in Ellie's calm demeanor and bustled off to another table. Ellie took a slow sip of her coffee, the warmth spreading through her chest. She looked around the peaceful diner, at the families enjoying their breakfast, at the familiar, friendly faces. This was her community. This was her peace. And she was a woman who understood, better than most, that peace was something you sometimes had to fight for. The peace was shattered at exactly 9:47 a.m. It wasn't a gradual disturbance, it was an invasion. A trio of motorcycles, their engines roaring with a guttural, obnoxious cadence, pulled into the parking lot, taking up 4 spaces. The front door of the North Star Diner swung open with a bang, admitting 3 men who seemed to suck the very light and warmth out of the room. Leading them was a mountain of a man, well over 6 feet tall and built with the brutish density of a wrecking ball. His leather vest was strained across a barrel chest, adorned with patches depicting snarling dogs and flaming skulls. The name, Scrap Hounds, was stitched crudely across the back. This was their leader, Gunnar. His face was a roadmap of bar fights and bad decisions, with a thick, greasy beard that couldn't hide a permanent sneer. His 2 companions were smaller, warrior versions of him, like jackals trailing a hyena. The cheerful 60s pop song playing on the jukebox seemed to wither and die. Conversations faltered. Forks clinked nervously against plates. Gunnar's eyes, small and dark like beads of oil, scanned the room with an air of predatory ownership. They swept past the families, the young couples, and settled on the corner booth. On Ellie. He swaggered towards her, his heavy boots thudding on the checkered linoleum floor. His 2 lackeys fanned out behind him, blocking the aisle. He stopped at her table, casting a long, greasy shadow over her book. "Move it, Grandma," he grunted, his voice a low rumble. "This is my spot." Ellie slowly looked up, her gaze calm and measured. She didn't feel fear. What she felt was a profound, weary annoyance, a feeling she remembered well from decades of dealing with arrogant men who believed their size and volume gave them authority. "Good morning," she replied, her voice even and clear. "I believe you'll find there are several other booths available. This one, however, is taken." Gunnar's sneer deepened. He wasn't expecting a response, let alone a refusal. He leaned forward, placing his thick, grimy hands on her table. The stench of stale beer and old leather washed over her. "I don't think you heard me. I said, this is my booth. Now get your ancient ass out of it before I move it for you." His voice was louder now, a deliberate performance for the rest of the diner. The young mother at the next table quickly gathered her children, herding them towards the cash register. Martha stood frozen behind the counter, her face pale with terror. Ellie didn't raise her voice. She simply looked him in the eye. "I've been sitting in this booth every Tuesday morning for 5 years. I have no intention of moving. I suggest you find another place to sit." For a moment, Gunnar seemed taken aback by her utter lack of fear. But his surprise quickly curdled into rage. Being defied, especially by an old woman, was an intolerable insult to his fragile ego. "You think you're tough, huh?" he snarled, his face turning a blotchy red. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a hiss laced with venom. "Some dried-up old hag thinks she can tell me what to do." The slap was shockingly fast. It wasn't a push or a shove, it was a sharp, deliberate strike, the crack of his calloused palm against her cheek echoing through the silent diner like a gunshot. Ellie's head snapped to the side from the force of the blow. The pain was a bright, stinging flare, but it was secondary. As his hand swept across, it caught the rim of her blue ceramic mug. Time seemed to slow as the cherished keepsake, the gift from her son, wobbled for a moment on the edge of the table. Then, it tumbled, falling to the floor with a heartbreakingly final crash, shattering into a dozen pieces. Absolute silence descended. Every eye was fixed on the scene. They saw the red mark blooming on the old woman's cheek. They saw the fragments of the broken mug scattered around her feet. The violation was no longer just an insult. It was a desecration. And in that shared, horrified moment, everyone in the diner held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The sting on Ellie's cheek was a distant fire, but the sight of the shattered blue ceramic on the floor ignited something much hotter inside her. It was a cold, clarifying rage. That mug was more than clay and glaze, it was a symbol of her son's love and respect, a tangible piece of the honorable world they both belonged to. And this brute had shattered it without a thought. She did not cry out. She did not touch her face. Slowly, with the deliberate precision of someone disarming a bomb, she lowered herself from the booth seat. She knelt on the floor, ignoring the shocked gasps and Gunnar's triumphant sneer. Her eyes scanned the fragments until she found the largest piece, the one still bearing the proud, golden eagle of the West Point crest. She picked it up, its sharp edge pressing into her palm, a grounding point of pain in the swirling vortex of humiliation. As she held the broken shard, her mind didn't flash back to her father or any childhood lesson. Instead, it pulled forth a memory from a rainy afternoon at Ramstein Air Base in 1982. She had been a young technical sergeant then, and a visiting colonel had dismissed her detailed logistics report, patting her on the head and telling her not to worry her pretty little head with men's work. She had been furious, humiliated. Later that day, her own commanding officer, a pioneering female chief master sergeant named Wallace, had found her fuming. Wallace hadn't offered sympathy. She'd offered strategy. "Don't ever let them see you bleed, Vance," she had said, her voice like gravel. "Don't meet their volume. Meet their arrogance with intelligence. Don't fight them on their terms. Create your own battlefield." Ellie stood up, her movements fluid and unhurried. She clutched the piece of the mug in her hand and looked at Gunnar, who was now laughing, basking in what he perceived as his victory. "What's wrong, Grandma?" he taunted. "Gonna pick up the pieces of your pathetic little life?" Ellie didn't answer him. She walked past him, her gaze fixed on a point beyond his shoulder. She sat down at an empty stool at the main counter, placing the broken piece of ceramic carefully in front of her. She looked at the terrified face of Martha, the owner. "A glass of water, please, Martha. When you have a moment." Her voice was unnaturally calm. It cut through the tension more effectively than a scream ever could. Then, she reached into her handbag and pulled out not a sleek smartphone, but a simple, durable flip phone, the kind favored by people who valued function over fashion. Gunnar watched her, his laughter growing louder. "Oh, this is rich. She's calling the cops. You hear that, boys? The old lady is gonna call Sheriff Andy on us." His men chuckled along with him. They weren't afraid of small-town police. They knew how to intimidate and bully their way out of minor charges. Ellie flipped open the phone and pressed a single speed dial button. She held the phone to her ear, her back straight, her eyes looking out the front window towards the street. The phone was answered on the second ring. "Alex, it's me," she said, her voice a placid sea. There was no tremor, no hint of the fury churning beneath the surface. "I'm at the North Star. There's been a small spot of bother." She paused, listening for a moment. "Yes, I'm all right. But I think it would be good if you could come by. When you have a chance." She didn't mention the slap. She didn't mention Gunnar or the shattered mug. She didn't have to. For 30 years, Alex had been attuned to his mother's every nuance. He knew her fine from her fine. And the carefully controlled placidity in her voice was a 5-alarm fire. It was the voice she used when the stakes were highest. "Okay," she said softly, and ended the call. She snapped the phone shut, placed it on the counter next to the broken shard, and folded her hands. And then, she waited. The battlefield had been chosen. The first move had been made. Now, it was his turn. With the phone call made, a strange calm settled over Ellie. She had set the pieces in motion, now she only needed to hold her position. She sipped her water, her gaze fixed on the parking lot, her posture radiating a patience that was more unsettling than any threat. Gunnar, however, interpreted her silence as surrender. His ego, puffed up by his public display of dominance, demanded an audience. He sprawled across the corner booth, throwing his filthy leather vest over the seat back as if it were a throne. "Hey! Waitress," he bellowed at a petrified young server. "Get over here. I want a steak. The biggest one you got. And a beer. Make it fast." The girl, Susan, scurried over, notepad trembling in her hand. I am sorry, sir, we don't serve beer, and our lunch menu doesn't start for another hour." "Did I ask for your excuses?" Gunnar roared, slamming his fist on the table. The salt and pepper shakers jumped. "I'm the customer. Go find me a steak, or maybe your boss needs to be reminded how flammable old buildings are." The threat, veiled but unmistakable, hung in the air. Martha rushed out from behind the counter. "It's all right, sir, we'll see what we can do. Please, just, keep your voice down." The atmosphere in the diner grew thick with fear. A low murmur of conversation had been replaced by a tense silence, punctuated only by the scrape of cutlery and Gunnar's obnoxious laughter. He regaled his two cronies with an embellished version of the morning's events, his voice carrying throughout the diner. He called Ellie a crazy old bat who needed to be taught a lesson in respect. Several more customers quietly paid their bills and slipped out the door, avoiding eye contact with the bikers. The diner was emptying, the remaining patrons eating quickly, their heads down, trying to become invisible. It was the bully's classic strategy: isolate the target, terrorize the witnesses, and claim the territory through fear. Ellie watched it all unfold, a clinical detachment settling over her. She saw the fear in Martha's eyes, the shame in the faces of the men who did nothing. This wasn't just an attack on her, it was an attack on the entire community, on the unspoken rules of decency and respect that held a small town together. Her resolve hardened. Alex wasn't just coming for her. He was coming for the North Star. Gunnar grew bolder with each passing minute. He propped his dirt-caked boots up on the table, leaned back, and began idly flipping sugar packets at a nearby table where a teenager was trying to finish his homework. The boy flinched but didn't dare say anything. Ellie checked the old-fashioned clock on the wall. 7 minutes had passed since her call. She knew Alex's recruiting station was nearly an hour away. But she also knew her son. When you have a chance, to him, hearing that tone in her voice, meant now. From her perch at the counter, she had a clear view of Elm Street. She ignored the turmoil behind her and focused on the horizon. Waiting was a skill she had perfected over a lifetime. She had waited for supply planes in sandstorms, waited for intelligence reports in secured bunkers, waited for her son to come home from his own deployments. She knew how to wait. Then, she heard it. It was faint at first, a low, rhythmic hum that was distinctly not the roar of a Harley. It was the sound of powerful, synchronized engines. It grew steadily louder, a sound of disciplined power. Gunnar and his men heard it too. They paused their crude jokes, looking around in confusion. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched Ellie's lips. The waiting was over. The response was arriving. The sound of the engine swelled, and then the vehicles came into view. 3 of them. Not police cruisers or pickup trucks, but deep green, wide-bodied HMMWVs, Humvees. They moved with a purpose and precision that was utterly alien to the lazy Tuesday morning traffic, pulling into the diner's parking lot and forming a perfect, staggered line as if executing a practiced maneuver. The doors of the lead vehicle opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall and broad-shouldered, moving with an athlete's easy grace. But it was his uniform that commanded attention. Not camouflage, but the immaculate, dark blue Army service uniform. On his shoulders, the silver oak leaf insignias of a lieutenant colonel glinted in the morning sun. This was Alex Vance. The promotion had been finalized just last week. He'd been planning to drive down this weekend, to surprise his mother with the news over a celebratory lunch. Instead, he was here now. As if on a silent command, the doors of the other 2 Humvees opened. 12 soldiers disembarked. Men and women of varying ages and backgrounds, all in the same crisp, formal attire. Their shoes were polished to a mirror shine, their posture ramrod straight. They were the top recruiters from Alex's regional command. They had been in the middle of a commendation ceremony when Alex had taken his mother's call. He had simply said, "I need to go," but they had seen the look on his face. When they heard that his mother, a retired Master Sergeant, needed him, not a single one was willing to stay behind. It was a matter of professional courtesy. A matter of family. Gunnar and his cronies stared out the window, their jaws slack. Their swagger evaporated, replaced by a dawning, horrified understanding. These weren't cops. This wasn't a local problem they could intimidate their way out of. This was the United States Army, in full dress uniform, on their doorstep. The soldiers didn't rush the diner. Led by Alex, they formed up in the parking lot, a silent, imposing phalanx of military order. Then, with Alex at the point, they began walking toward the entrance. The jingle of the bell on the diner door, usually a cheerful sound, now sounded like a death knell for Gunnar's arrogance. Alex stepped inside, his eyes immediately finding his mother at the counter. He saw the red mark on her cheek, still faintly visible, and his jaw tightened. His gaze then fell to the broken piece of the West Point mug on the counter beside her, and a glacial coldness settled in his eyes. He walked to her first, his polished boots making no sound on the floor. "Are you all right, Mom?" he asked, his voice low and controlled. Ellie simply nodded, her eyes conveying everything he needed to know. Then, she shifted her gaze pointedly towards the corner booth. Alex's eyes followed hers and landed on Gunnar, who was trying and failing to look nonchalant. The power in the room had shifted so completely it was a physical force. The air crackled with it. Lieutenant Colonel Alex Vance turned and walked towards the booth. He didn't run, he didn't shout. He moved with the calm, unshakable authority of a man who had led soldiers in combat, a man for whom intimidation was not a tool, but an obstacle to be dismantled. He stopped at the table, looking down at the biker. His shadow fell over Gunnar, just as Gunnar's had fallen over his mother. "I'm Lieutenant Colonel Alex Vance," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of the entire U.S. Army. "You and I are going to have a conversation. Outside. Now." It wasn't a request. It was an order. Gunnar, for the first time that day, looked truly afraid. The bravado, the anger, the swagger, it all collapsed under the weight of that calm, authoritative gaze. He looked at Alex, then at the 12 stone-faced soldiers standing like sentinels by the door, and knew he had made a catastrophic mistake. The conversation in the parking lot was brief and remarkably one-sided. There was no shouting, no violence. There was only Lieutenant Colonel Alex Vance speaking in a low, even tone, flanked by 12 silent soldiers who stood with their arms clasped respectfully behind their backs. The effect was more terrifying than any physical threat. It was the crushing weight of organized, disciplined consequence. 5 minutes later, a pale, visibly trembling Gunnar walked back into the diner alone. He looked like a man who had just been shown a glimpse of a world he wanted no part of. He walked directly to Ellie, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Ma'am," he stammered, the word clumsy and foreign in his mouth. I am sorry. For my behavior. For the mug. For everything. It was wrong. There's no excuse." He fumbled in his pocket, pulled out a crumpled $100 bill, and laid it on the counter. "For the damages." Ellie looked at him, her expression unreadable. She gave a single, slow nod of acceptance. With that, Gunnar turned and practically fled the diner, his 2 lackeys scrambling after him. The roar of their Harleys starting up sounded less like a display of power and more like a panicked retreat. Alex waited until the sound of the motorcycles had faded completely before he came back inside. He walked over to his mother, his stern, officer's demeanor melting away, replaced by the warmth of a loving son. His eyes fell on the silver oak leaf on his own shoulder, and then he looked at her. "I was going to surprise you this weekend," he said, a small smile playing on his lips. Ellie reached up and gently touched the insignia on his uniform, her own smile full of a fierce, bottomless pride. "You have no idea how proud of you I am, Lieutenant Colonel." Alex picked up the broken shard of the mug from the counter. "We'll get you a new one, Mom." Ellie gently took it from his hand, closing her fingers around it. "No," she said softly. "I think I'll keep this piece. To remind me that some things are worth protecting." The diner, which had been holding a collective breath, finally exhaled. The tension broke, replaced by a wave of relief and gratitude. Martha, the owner, came over with tears in her eyes and declared that Ellie, Alex, and all the soldiers would be eating for free, for life. Other customers approached, not with pity, but with respect, shaking Ellie's hand and thanking her for her service. The story of what happened at the North Star spread through town, but not as a tale of a brawl. It became a story about respect, honor, and the quiet strength of a female veteran. The scrap hounds were never seen in town again. 2 weeks later, a package arrived for Ellie. Inside was a brand new, handcrafted mug, a near-perfect replica of the one that had been broken, along with a handwritten letter of apology from Gunnar, explaining that he had learned a lesson about what real strength was. The corner booth was unofficially rechristened Ellie's booth. It became a local landmark. And every Tuesday morning, without fail, a green military Humvee would pull into the parking lot, and Lieutenant Colonel Alex Vance would step out to have breakfast with his mother, Master Sergeant Eleanor Vance, retired. Their weekly ritual was no longer just a quiet meal, it was a living monument to dignity, courage, and a bond forged in honor. Real strength isn't about the noise you make, but the stand you take. Ellie and Alex showed their town what true honor looks like. What did you think of Alex's response? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Please be kind and comment with respect. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible stories of everyday heroes.